I want to start today's deep dive with a bit of a contradiction.
Okay, I'm listening.
Because usually, when you look at a map, a specific point, a set of coordinates, it represents one thing.
Right, like a house or a bridge or whatever.
Exactly. But we have a set of coordinates today for you that seems to be having a bit of an identity crisis.
And it's a crisis that actually tells us a lot about how history gets written.
Yeah, so the coordinates are 45 degrees, 38 minutes north, and 23 degrees, 13 minutes east. Now, if you punch that into a GPS, you are going to land right in the middle of Hunedoara County in Romania.
Beautiful area.
It is. And if you look at the official database entry for this exact spot, the classification is, well, it's very clear. It says Fețele Albe. It says castra.
Right.
Which is the Latin word for a military fort. So, case closed, right? We're doing a deep dive on a Roman fort.
Well, if you stop reading at the headline, sure, it's a Roman fort. But the minute you start, pulling the actual files, the papers written by the people who dug the place up, that label really starts to peel off.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We are looking at Fețele Albe. On paper, it's a Roman auxiliary fort in the province of Dacia.
But in the footnotes, it's
described as something entirely different, a Dacian settlement.
Yeah.
And we are going to figure out why those two things are fighting for space on the exact same hill and who exactly decided to put them there.
Because this is really an exercise in reading between the lines of a database. We have a physical location, we have administrative labels, and we have a list of archaeologists.
And some of the biggest names in the field, too.
Absolutely. People who spent years arguing about what this place actually was.
So let's ground ourselves first. We're in Hunedoara County. For anyone listening who hasn't backpacked through Romania, paint the picture. Like, why is this specific spot important in the grand scheme of ancient history in Transylvania?
Well, you really have to understand the geography to understand the conflict here. Hunedoara isn't just some random province. In the ancient world, this was the absolute heartland of the Dacian kingdom.
Okay.
This is where their capital was located. It's rugged, it's highly defensible, and crucially, it was incredibly rich in resources.
We're talking gold, iron.
Gold, iron, timber. So when the Romans showed up, this wasn't like marching into an open plain. They were walking into a massive fortress region.
Right, a really hostile environment for an invading army.
Exactly. And that is why the administrative layers we see in the source material are so interesting. The entry lists the province as Dacia, which is the broad term, right?
Yeah.
But then it gets much more specific. It lists Dacia Apulensis and Dacia Superior.
I wanted to ask you about that, actually, because to me, that just looked like, I don't know, bureaucratic noise, like someone listing USA and then North America. Why do we need three different names for the exact same patch of dirt?
Because the names represent time, not just space.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Rome didn't just conquer Dacia and leave it as is. They were constantly tweaking how they managed it because it was such a difficult frontier to hold on to.
So it was an evolving situation.
Exactly. Dacia Superior was an administrative division that was created shortly after the initial conquest. But later on, things get reshuffled again and you get Dacia Apulensis.
So finding Fețele Albe listed under both of those specific labels, that's not a typo in the database.
No, not at all. It's essentially a timeline. It tells us that this site, whatever it was active and significant enough to be tracked through multiple major reorganizations of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
It survived the red tape. If it was just a temporary marching camp, it wouldn't necessarily show up in these later distinct administrative layers.
Okay, so we have a site that persisted. It's sitting there in the mountains of Transylvania, just watching the empire change the maps around it.
Yeah.
But this brings us back to the main event.
The classification.
Right. The big bold text on the file says Roman castra,
Which is a facility for auxiliary troops.
meaning non-citizen soldiers fighting for Rome.
Correct.
But then I looked at the bibliography for this site, and this is where I got really confused. There is a primary reference from 1969. It's by Hadrian Daicoviciu and Ioan Glodariu.
Two absolute legends in the field.
Right. And the title of their paper is in Romanian, but the translation is, well, it's pretty problematic for the whole Roman fort theory.
Read the translation for us.
It says, Considerations on the Chronology of the Dacian Settlement at Fețele Albe.
And there is the tension.
Yeah. How do you get Roman fort as the main database category when the primary source material is literally titled Dacian Settlement? Are we looking at a mistake? Did someone file this wrong?
We aren't looking at a mistake at all. We are looking at stratigraphy.
Meaning the layers of dirt?
The layers of dirt, yes, but also a layering of history. This is arguably the most common problem in Roman archaeology, specifically in a place like Dacia. You always have to ask the question, what was there before the Romans arrived?
And you mentioned earlier this was the Dacian heartland, so presumably people were already living there.
Exactly. Fețele Albe is incredibly close to the Dacian capital. It was a major terrace settlement. It had civilian habitation, likely distinct Dacian architecture, maybe even high religious significance.
Okay.
When the Romans finally conquered the area, they didn't just bulldoze everything and leave it completely flat.
They repurposed it.
Often, yes. Or they built a military installation right on top of the burned ruins to ensure the locals didn't come back and try to rebuild.
A show of force.
Very much so. So when Daicoviciu and Glodariu are writing about the Dacian settlement in 1969, they are actively analyzing the indigenous roots of the site.
The bottom layer.
Right. But the database, which classifies it strictly as a castra, is focusing almost entirely on the imperial overlay, the Roman military presence that came afterward.
It kind of feels like the database is burying the lead a bit. By just calling it a Roman fort, it almost erases the people who were there first.
That is a very modern way to look at it, and it's a completely valid point. Roman administrative records tend to dominate our view of history because the Romans were the ones writing things down and building massive structures in stone.
Yeah, they left a very loud footprint.
They did. But the actual artifacts pulled out of the ground tells the story of the settlement that predates them.
And this is where another specific book mentioned in the source material really comes in. It's called The Dacian Stones Speak by Paul Lachlan McKendrick.
Ah, yes, a classic. Published in 1975.
The title alone, The Dacian Stones Speak, it seems to take a definitive side in this argument. It's not called the Roman forts speak.
That's a great point. McKendrick was trying to synthesize the complex archaeology of Romania for an English-speaking audience. He was very interested in that persistence of local culture.
So he wasn't just interested in the conquerors.
No, he wasn't just looking at standard Roman walls. He was looking at how the Dacian identity survived or mutated under Roman rule.
So Fețele Albe is practically the poster child for his entire book. It's a place where you can point to the map and say, here is the native settlement, and here is the imperial fort that sat right on top of it.
And that duality is exactly why those coordinates, 45 degrees, 38 minutes north, 23 degrees, 13 minutes east, are so heavy with meaning.
It's not just a spot on a map.
No, it's a crash site between two major civilizations.
I want to pivot a little bit to the people who are actually doing the digging. The source material lists a lot of names. I mean, we have Alexandra Volpe, Ioan Glodariu, Ioan Piso, Hadrian Daicoviciu, A. Rusu, Eugen Yaroslavsky, M. Barbulescu, and T. Sorosianu. It feels like a roll call.
It's not just a roll call, though. It's a lineage. These aren't just random researchers who spent a weekend in the dirt. If you study Roman Dacia, these are the absolute titans of the field.
Who stands out to you the most from that list?
Yeah.
Because the names Hadrian Daicoviciu and Ioan Glodariu just keep popping up in the references. They wrote that 1969 paper we were just talking about.
Hadrian Daicoviciu is a towering figure. His father, Constantin Daicoviciu, was also a massive figure in Romanian archaeology. Together, they practically defined the modern study of the Dacian fortresses.
Oh, wow.
So when you see Hadrian Daicoviciu's name attached to Fețele Albe, it signals immediately that this site was considered a top priority.
Why is that? What makes it such a priority for someone of his stature?
Because of that exact settlement versus fort question we've been discussing, Daicoviciu was deeply invested in understanding the Dacian state on its own terms. He wasn't just hunting for Roman eagles and Latin inscriptions.
He wanted the local story.
He wanted to know how the Dacian society functioned before it was dismantled. So for him to focus so heavily on Fețele Albe suggests he saw it as a key piece of the puzzle regarding the Dacian defensive network, not just another Roman outpost.
And what about Glodariu?
Ioan Glodariu was brilliant at analyzing the architecture and the complex trade networks of the region. When they teamed up for that 1969 paper in Acta Musae Napatensis.
Let's pause on that. Acta Musae Napatensis. That's the specific journal listed in the footnotes, right? Volume 6.
Yes. And this is vital context for the listener. We are talking about the late 1960s. This site was being actively analyzed and debated during a very specific era.
Right.
And the research is coming out in this specific academic volume, showing that the scholarly community was intensely focused on unraveling the timeline of this one location.
It's fascinating because it highlights this real tension. We have the dry Western classification in the database calling it a Roman fort. But then we have the 1969 paper diving deep into the chronology of the Dacian settlement.
Exactly.
It really emphasizes how you just can't read the summary of a historical site and walk away thinking, the whole story. You have to look at who is writing the papers and when they are writing them.
Absolutely.
Speaking of when, let's talk about the timeline of the sources themselves. The Daicoviciu and Glodariu paper in Acta Musei Napocensis is from 1969. The McKendrick book from the University of North Carolina Press is from 1975. That's a 6-year gap.
Which, in the pre-internet era, is actually pretty fast for international academic translation and synthesis.
It is, but it also highlights a massive barrier in how history gets shared, doesn't it? If I'm an archaeology student in the U.S. in 1970, I have absolutely no idea this conversation about Fețele Albe is even happening unless I can read Romanian and somehow have a subscription to Acta Musei Napocensis.
That is spot on. And that is exactly why McKendrick acts as the vital bridge here. He reads the reports, he understands the significance of what Daicoviciu and Glodariu are arguing, and he brings that nuanced knowledge back to the English-speaking world through the University of North Carolina Press.
So without McKendrick publishing in 1975, Fețele Albe might just remain a simple Roman fort in English literature indefinitely.
It's very likely. McKendrick's work allowed international audiences to see the Dacian stones underneath the Roman administration. It's a great reminder that archaeological knowledge travels slowly across language barriers, and it often risks getting simplified in transit.
Yeah. So if we look at the source text we have today for this deep dive, this short entry with just some coordinates, a couple of administrative tags, and a few references, it's really a compression of all that immense effort.
I like to think of it as a zip file of history. You have the coordinates, which are the physical reality. You have the administrative tags like Dacia Superior and Dacia Apulensis, which represent the Roman bureaucracy. And then you have the bibliography, which is the modern academic struggle to define what actually happened there.
And the struggle itself seems to be the main point. It's not really about winning the argument of whether it's a fort or a town. It's about acknowledging that for the people who actually lived there, it was a layered reality.
It was a reality that fundamentally changed. Imagine living in Fețele Albe right before the Roman conquest. It's a thriving Dacian settlement. You have your home, your pottery, your daily routine. And then just a few years later, after the war, it's a Roman auxiliary castra. It's the exact same coordinates, the exact same sunrise over the mountains, but it is a completely different world. The fort and the settlement aren't contradictory at all. They are just sequential chapters in the exact same book.
That is a really haunting way to put it. The coordinates don't move, but the entire world changes around them.
And the archaeologists we listed, Volpe, Piso, Rusu, Aroslavski, Barbulescu, Sorosianu, Daicoviciu, Glodariu, they are all just trying to read those chapters out of the dirt.
It really makes me wonder about all the other short stubs or brief entries in these historical databases. You see a name and a coordinate and you just scroll past it. But every single one of them probably has a dedicated team of scholars who spent a decade of their life trying to figure out what was really there.
There are no boring archaeological sites. There are only sites we haven't bothered to read the footnotes for yet.
I think that's the perfect takeaway for today. The tag Dacia Superior sounds incredibly dry at first glance, but it represents the logistics of a massive empire. The names in the bibliography sound like just another academic citation, but they represent a rigorous, decades-long effort to uncover a localized history.
And Fețele Albe sounds like just another dot on a map, but it's a literal and figurative battlefield of identity.
And it's all just sitting there at 45 degrees, 38 minutes north, 23 degrees, 13 minutes east, waiting for someone to notice the details.
Well, we noticed today.
We did. And it leaves me with one final thought for you as we wrap up. If a site listed as a simple fort with just some coordinates and a list of names holds this much hidden conflict, how much more history is sitting right now in untranslated footnotes, just waiting for someone to finally read the title of a 50-year-old research paper?
Always check the stratigraphy of your sources.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Until next time.